Howdy folks, come on in, get yourself comfy, gather around, come on, because I'm going to tell you a tale all about my friend called Rocky Raccoon. And it goes something a little like this. So Rocky Raccoon, he was a good friend of mine. He lived out in the Black Mountain Hills of Dakota. And Rocky, well, he had himself a very, very pretty girl. Now this girl, she's the type of girl you wouldn't say no to. I certainly didn't say no to her when I had the chance. But anyway, Rocky was very happy with this girl. But one day this girl, she took off with some other guy. But just before her and the other guy took off with this new guy, he punched Rocky in the eye, and Rocky, well, he didn't like that. Rocky was like, no, I'm gonna get that boy. So Rocky swore revenge on the guy. So Rocky then took himself away into town, and while he was in town, he booked himself a room in the local saloon, and that rhymes. It's very good, actually. I'm quite good at the old rhyming me. Anyway, he went into his room, and he went up to his room in the saloon. I'm just repeating myself there, evidently. Anyway, he got in his room, and he found in that room Gideon's Bible. Now, he didn't really know what that was, but we'll get back to that shortly. It's a funny joke. It's an ongoing joke, him and that Bible. Anyway, Rocky, he come equipped with his gun. He was intending to shoot off the head of his rival, because his rival, he'd broken his dreams by stealing the girl of his fancy. And who was this girl? Who was this very pretty girl that Rocky was beset with, that he was determined to go on a path of revenge for? Well, her name was Marissa McGill. But she called herself Lil. But we all know her as Nancy. Now, she don't know what we call her Nancy. That's just a joke between us fellas. But, I know why we call her Nancy. Just don't tell her. If you know her, don't tell her that we call her Nancy. Because, she's the sort of girl, she won't shut up about it. And she'll get it out of you. We don't want her to know because it's sort of an in-joke. Anyway, Nancy had her new fella with her. Who's this new fella, you're asking? Who's the one Rocky wants revenge on? Well, his name is called Reese, but for some reason he calls himself Dan. I don't really know why he calls himself Dan, but that's what he does anyway. He calls himself Dan. Anyway, Nancy and Dan, they were in the room next door to Rocky, so Rocky decided the time had come. So he got his gun, he kicked the door in, and he burst in. He was grinning a grin, alright, and he said, "Danny boy, this is a showdown." Now, unfortunately for Rocky, Daniel, he was hot. He drew out his gun and he shot poor Rocky. And then Rocky collapsed in the corner. And then Daniel then decided to shoot a different kind of load into Nancy, got her pregnant, but that's a story for another day. Anyway, downstairs in the saloon, they were playing some honky-tonk on the piano, and there happened to be a doctor down there. So the doctor, he went upstairs. Now, this wasn't David Tennant or Peter Capaldi or anyone like that. This was a doctor who was also very drunk. Now, he decided that he would attend to Rocky. He got him up on the table. Now, this doctor, he was stinking. He was absolutely stinking of the gin. And he said to Rocky, "Rocky, son, you met your match here." And then Rocky, he did not like this. He said, "Doc, it's only a scratch, and I'll be better. I will get him as soon as I'm able." And then Rocky, well, he then went back in his room, and what was in the room? Well, it was Gideon's Bible. But Rocky, he's a bit silly sometimes. He thought that this Bible belonged to a guy called Gideon. Gideon being the previous guy in the room, and he left it for Rocky. And Rocky thought this Bible was going to help with his recovery. So yeah, that's the story, folks, of my good friend Rocky Raccoon. Although there is more to it, that what happened next, because, it's kind of not known what happened next, but I'm going to tell you, because, you're my friends. I'm going to tell you what happened next. This is what happened next. You want to know what happened next? I'm going to tell you what happened next. Well, Rocky, he met himself another girl, a much nicer girl, and he married her. They're married now, husband and wife, and they had kids. They have a family and everything. Anyway, one day, Rocky was out on maneuvers, and he banged into Danny Boy. Daniel was here, and he thought, oh no, the guy's gonna come for me again. Rocky had lost interest in revenge. By this point, he knew why we call her Nancy. He's calling her Nancy too now. But Danny Boy, well, he'd had the same thing done to him. Nancy took off with some other fellow and left poor old Danny Boy on his own now. So Danny had also met himself another lady, much nicer lady than Nancy, and they then got themselves married and also had kids. And now, Rocky and Danny, they're best friends. You can't separate them. They're inseparable. Their families go on holiday everywhere together. It's utterly ridiculous. I mean, they shot at each other once upon a day, and now they're good friends. And that, folks, is the moral of the story. Revenge, it's a fool's game. Love thy neighbor. Welcome back to the White Album in Doubt. For this is episode 13, Rocky Raccoon. Right, I think that's enough for the silly voices, or maybe this is the silly voice, maybe this is the fake accent and the other one was the real one. Maybe I really speak like this and this is the fake one, who knows. Anyway, the Stetson's staying on because, cowboy hats and all that. Cowboys are cool. Well, a cowboy in the north of England, something very different. to a cowboy in America. If you have a cowboy show up at your house around these parts, it's not the sort of thing you would want. Anyway, I think we should get into the story of Rocky Raccoon. Now, as often seems to be the case in this series, we're going to begin in India, because in spring 1968 the Beatles went to Rishikesh in India to study meditation with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and while they were there they also had a number of other people attending with them, one of which was Donovan. Anyway, one day Paul McCartney, John Lennon and Donovan went up onto the roof of the ashram, and whilst they were up there Paul began composing a new song. The song would be Rocky Raccoon, and whilst up there John and Donovan would also assist in writing the song. So this is one of the few White Album songs where John and Paul have kind of wrote it together, although it's mainly Paul. But John has contributed. So it's actually a Lennon and McCartney song. Hey! Paul was wanting to write a country and western song, and he was wanting to do it in the style of one of his story songs. He wanted it to be amusing, just a bit of fun. He was wanting to tell the tale of a young American cowboy who was seeking revenge on his love rival. Paul intended for this song really just to be a little play, which it kind of is. It's a very short play, but yeah, that's kind of what the song is. You can make it into a play. You can make it into a story about a cowboy telling you it. Originally Paul titled the song Rocky Sassoon, but he didn't like the name. He wanted to change it, so he changed it to Rocky Raccoon because he thought that sounded more like a cowboy. And who doesn't like cowboys, American cowboys in the Wild West? Yeehaw! Paul particularly liked the lyric about Gideon's Bible. The idea that Paul wanted to tell here was just an amusing story that Rocky thought that Gideon was the guy in the room before him, and he'd just left his Bible behind, and Rocky found it and thought that he'd just left it as a little gift. He didn't really know anything about Gideon's Bible. So yeah, that was just an amusing little funny lyric that Paul wanted to put in. So the section of the song about a drunken doctor, it actually came from a memory of Paul. So back in 1965, he actually had a moped accident. He fell off and he whacked his head off the pavement and split his lip open. Now at the time he was on his way to his cousin Betty's house, and when he got to Betty's house, well, Betty said it needs stitches, he needs to see a doctor. He was in quite a bad way actually. So Betty called the doctor, and the doctor came round there and then actually. He was, yeah, you don't get a service like that these days. But another thing you wouldn't get these days, the doctor, because it was Christmas time, he'd been on the drink. So he showed up absolutely pissed, drunk as a skunk. But he decided he was still going to give Paul stitches, because Paul was in quite a bad way actually. Now the doctor, he didn't have any anaesthetic with him, so Paul was going to have to just endure the pain. So he started stitching his lip back together, and eventually he managed to get it done. But Paul has said it wasn't a very good job he'd done, and he was left with a lump, or a bump, one of the two, or the same thing, maybe the same thing, on his lip for quite some time. You can kind of still see it on the music video for Paperback Writer, and you can still see Paul's chipped tooth on there too. Paul even says that to this day he can still sometimes feel where the doctor attempted to fix his lip anyway. Anyway, this idea of a drunken doctor, it stayed with Paul, and he decided to bring the idea into his song Rocky Raccoon a few years later. So when the Beatles returned from India, they eventually decided to regroup at George's house in Isha during the last week of May of 1968, where they would record 27 acoustic demos, the vast amount for songs that would end up on the White Album. One of the songs recorded that day was Rocky Raccoon. So in this demo form, the song is actually missing its intro, the bit about somewhere in the Black Mining Hills of Dakota. That bit, it's not there. It just goes straight into the bit where Rocky's checking into his room in the saloon. But otherwise, the rest of the lyrics are mainly there. Paul kind of knows what he's doing with the song. The melody is more or less there, so he kind of has an idea of where he's going with the song, just the lyrics aren't finished yet. Anyway, if you want to hear this issue demo, well, you can. It's on the 50th anniversary edition of the White Album, along with all the other ones, for your listening pleasure. The Beatles eventually began work on Rocky Raccoon on August 15th, 1968 at Abbey Road, or EMI Studios as it was actually known then. They would rehearse, record and complete the song all in a single session, which was a pretty rare thing to do in 1968 for the band. So to begin with, the band worked on the basic track. Now all four Beatles were present at Abbey Road for this session. However, George Harrison wouldn't play on the basic track. Instead, he would sit up in the control room watching the session unfold. So for this basic track, Paul McCartney played acoustic guitar while singing his lead vocals, Ringo Starr played the drums, and John Lennon played the 6-string bass guitar. The band recorded 9 takes of the basic track, and they decided that take 9 was actually the best of them all. Now take 8 has subsequently been released on both Anthology 3 and the 50th anniversary edition of the White Album. Why they felt the need to release the same take twice on both those different things, I don't know. Especially when there's 7 other takes that have never been released, but I just assume they're incomplete or something. They just think they're not worth us hearing. But this take 8, this has a different intro, which actually suggests that Paul hadn't finished writing the lyrics even by the time they were recording it. And it also includes the bit about the doctor schminking of gin rather than stinking of gin. Paul even starts chuckling during it. It's quite funny. Nice. Anyway, the band now turned their attention to adding overdubs onto take 9. Now to begin with, before they started overdubbing, they decided to start removing things. They completely removed John Lennon's 6-string bass guitar and they decided that it would be re-recorded afresh. Now when they came to re-record the bass parts, it was actually a pretty rare thing. It was a bass duet between John and Paul. So for this duet, John would play the 6-string bass guitar and Paul would play the more traditional 4-string bass guitar. So yeah, throughout this track there are two basses going on. Paul's bass comes in from around the 54-second mark. If you listen carefully, you can actually kind of tell that there's two different basses on the song. So after the bass was sorted, John then added some harmonium onto the song and Ringo added a little bit more snare drum onto the song just to emphasise the gunshots. So the next overdub that was added would be John's harmonica to the song. Now this is actually quite interesting because it's the final time that John ever played harmonica on a Beatles track. The harmonica had been a staple of the early Beatles sound. It was always played by John and it was sort of the driving force on songs like Love Me Do and I Should Have Known Better and From Me to You, to name a few. But this was the last time in the Beatles that he ever played it. Now for the last few years it had not been used at all, so it was brought back specifically for this song and it works in the context of this song. But yeah, it's the last time on a Beatles record John played it. He did subsequently play it a few times on his solo stuff. I think Crippled Inside springs to mind as one of his solo songs with a harmonica on it. Anyway, once the harmonica was onto the track, George Martin then got involved. He would overdub some honky-tonk piano onto the song. 2 honky-tonk piano solos, in my opinion one of the highlights of the entire track. Finally, Paul, John and George recorded some harmony vocals for the track, and with those onto the track, that was the song complete and ready to go. The White Album was released on the 22nd of November 1968 and Rocky Raccoon would be the 5th song on side 2 of the album. It was also the 13th track overall on the album. It would also serve as the 3rd and final track in a trilogy of songs with animals in their title. So for me personally, I absolutely adore this song. It has always been one of my favourite tracks on the White Album. It is pure McCartney. It is a brilliant McCartney story song. It is why he's my favourite Beatle, things like this. He's just brilliant at it. I love the song. It is a bloody good country song. George Martin's honky-tonk piano solos also are brilliant. They're fabulous. They sound like they're straight out of a saloon. It just adds to the entire vibe of the song perfectly. It always sounds to me, this song, like the Beatles are just having good fun. They're enjoying this song. Now I know John in later years, he said that he had nothing to do with the song, that he wouldn't go to the effort of writing about Gideon's Bible and stuff. But I'm sorry, he sounds like he's enjoying it on this anyway. And I just think that was him trying to be cool. It's a bloody good country song and all 4 Beatles are contributing to it. I know George is only doing the backing vocals, but it's still, you know, it just sounds like they're having fun. That's all this song is. It is good fun. Plus the song's got John playing the harmonica on it and you can't not like the harmonica, you can't not respect this song for the harmonica. It's the last time he plays it on a Beatles record and it was such a staple to the Beatles' early sound. It's what introduced us to the Beatles really. Love Me Do starts with a harmonica, that comes from John, and Love Me Do is what introduced us all to the Beatles in 1962. Now as I've mentioned in previous videos, the White Album, it covers so many different genres and look, here we are again with another genre, country and western. And this song is just, it's a brilliant country song. It is pure McCartney, it's Paul's genius at its very best. I love his story songs. I love when they just do a funny little story. It's brilliant, I absolutely love this song. Rocky Raccoon. So that concludes another episode of the White Album in depth. I've really enjoyed this one because I love the song. I don't know if you can tell when I like a song, when I don't like a song, but when I like it, I get really into it. Anyway, yes, this one, it's been good fun doing this song. If you have enjoyed this, please do consider subscribing to my channel if you're not already subscribed. Cowboys approve of subscribing to this channel. Anyway, if you've not seen any previous episodes in this series and you'd like to, well, I have a playlist on my channel that consists of all previous episodes, and all future episodes will also go into that playlist. Anyway, I will see you next time on the White Album in depth when it is finally Ringo time! Woohoo! Until then though, do take care, partner.